What is the equivalent of Kryptonite in the Marvel Universe?
I think you might have me stumped. What is the equivalent of Kryptonite in the Marvel Universe? Oh my goodness. Hey, fellow geeks. This is Eddie deAngelini, the writer, artist, and creator of the Comic Strip Collectors and co-owner of Heidi Ho Comics in Santa Monica, California, and you are watching Two Geeks Talking. Ready?
Good morning, afternoon, evening, everyone. Two Geeks Talking is an entertainment industry interview show where we interview the creative people from the comic, film, TV, movie, and video game industries. And of course, I'm your host, Kurt Sasso. We are joined today by a very talented, not only comic book store owner, but he is also a comic creator himself. We are joined by a very talented person, Eddie deAngelini.
You got the last name right, deAngelini. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. We'll talk about your business. We'll talk about the collector's comic, which is, of course, your comic here, but you have a Kickstarter going on as well, too. So we have a lot to talk about in general. For those that don't know anything about, of course, yourself and, of course, about your comic, tell us what it's all about.
My comic is a weekly webcomic. I started in 2012, and it goes online to this day. And in the process of doing it as a weekly webcomic, I have printed 5 collections of the comic strip, and currently now on Kickstarter is the 6th one soon to be. And it's loosely based, it's a Sunday style newspaper type comic strip, very much based on that format, loosely based on my own life with my wife and my comic book collecting and all the nerdy stuff she puts up with living with a collector. And she likes to describe it as about a guy who loves his wife and his comic book collection, but not always in that order.
What spurred you and your passion for collecting comics? You know, why, how did that all come about?
That came about in my youth. I remember vividly gravitating towards Spider-Man for 2 reasons. I'm old enough to have grown up watching The Electric Company on PBS, and they would always do a little bit with a guy dressed up in a Spider-Man costume that would come out and do funny little bit, but he never spoke. If anyone remembers, is old enough to remember, he never spoke in those segments. There was just always a thought balloon that would just appear over his head with a little whoop sound effect. It wasn't until much later that I realized, oh, Spider-Man can talk. I kind of gravitated towards the character then, and whenever I was home sick from school as a kid, my dad would always stop home on the way home from work at like a drugstore or whatever, and he would buy some comic books for me to keep me occupied while I was homesick. He recognized Spider-Man, so he would buy anything with Spider-Man on the cover, and he would bring that home, and that just started a love for comic books.
That's amazing. So then that love of comics transitioned to owning a store.
Eventually, yeah. I mean, there was a lot more that happened in between that time when I was young to owning a shop. I actually kind of gravitated away from comics for a while in my 20s, like towards the end of high school, and in my 20s got interested in other things like, you know, motorcycles and cars. Later on, after my 20s, I kind of gravitated back towards comic books and remembered how much I loved them and remembered how much I loved the art and the characters and the stories. Just picked up that comic collecting bug all over again. And it just led to a life of long boxes all over the house, all over again. That did transition into me working for a local shop here in the LA area, running their eBay store, their online presence, then partnering with the owner of that shop to buy the shop that we own now, which is Heidi Ho Comics in Santa Monica, California.
So then in looking at the long history of comics, you know, why is the traditional Sunday funnies that you've modeled your comic after so critical to, you know, a reader of comics?
Unless you're at a certain age, I don't think it's really relevant anymore because we live in an age, unfortunately, where newspapers are pretty much a dying breed, if not already dead. There's been all kinds of stories from the last 10, 15, 20 years about cartoonists who made a nice living in newspaper funnies who are suddenly scrambling, trying to find other work or wondering what to do. I think for people my age, it's remembered fondly because we grew up with it every Sunday morning, waking up and just spending hours going through this big pullout of Sunday Funnies and then drawing what you see and copying. And it was like a big deal as a kid. And unfortunately, I don't think younger people, say who are in their 20s now, really had that experience, because newspapers, as people have seen, the Sunday Funnies, which were huge in, my youth, have just shrunk and shrunk and shrunk. And, on top of that, there's no more Saturday morning cartoons. So I don't know what kids eat their cereal with anymore.
Or if they even eat cereal these days.
Who knows? I don't know. The whole world has gone crazy.
Harking back to a time of nostalgia, plain and simple. That's what it boils down to. What does Collector's Comic, bring to those that read it?
I think it brings like a certain sense of camaraderie. It's very much kind of targeted towards people who are in a relationship and where one is very much a collector or into the whole pop culture phenomenon of comic books and the superhero movies, and their relationship with someone who's not, and where the kind of two lifestyles collide and where the funny is in that. I just set out to tell funny stories of what it's like being a full-on collector of comics, living with someone who isn't, and telling the funny stories and things, the funny gags that come out of that, not even realizing that to a certain extent, I kind of hit on something with a lot of other couples as well, who are somewhat in that same situation. Whether it's the husband or the wife that's the collector, it always seems to have some sort of relevance to their own life that they seem to gravitate towards.
Humor is always a hard thing to pin down when it comes to creating comics. Everyone is subjective in their own type of humor. Like for me, I love Mel Brooks and I love that style of humor. And that's just how I grew up. And I'm just telling you my age basically right now.
As did I. I had parents who said, "Oh my God, these are such funny movies. You should watch them," when I was a little kid. And so they exposed me to the likes of Young Frankenstein, High Anxiety, Silent Movie. And I thought those were hysterical. Even to this day, I still do.
Well, they're coming out with a second part of History of the World.
About time. We were teased with that at the end of the first one for how many decades ago. It's about time.
And the good news is Mel Brooks is actually writing that one. So
Good.
That's even better. I can't wait to see that. Hopefully it comes out sooner than later. So humor is very subjective, and we all have our own basis when it comes to humor itself, though. What other themes did you draw from to create your comics over the years that you have?
I never really give a thought to the humor side of it. I just do what I think is funny. And if other people find it funny as well, great. In fact, it's even discouraging sometimes when I put out one that I think, oh my God, this is so funny. This has got to be the funniest one I ever did. And it doesn't get the response that I wish it would. And then I do one just as a throwaway, just to get something up there, and everyone goes nuts for it. So I don't really know what's funny. I just do what I think is funny. But I think the main theme that really ties the whole comic strip together is really the theme of relationships, my marriage, my love and my admiration and my deep friendship with my wife. Really, all the humor comes from that. And I think if your humor comes from something that's very solid and very meaningful, it's going to have an impact, hopefully, on other people as well. It's just unavoidable, I think.
So then as a store owner and as an avid collector of comics, relatable stories, relationship stories basically is what I was looking for, in terms of person that walks in isn't the geek that you expected.
That happens a lot, because a lot of people have this misconception that the people that frequent comic shops is the nerdy guy who probably is single and doesn't even have a wife. And the truth be told, that is a stereotype to a certain extent. There really is a huge variety of people that come into a shop and love and read comic books. They come from all walks of life. There are a lot of times where a couple comes in and you think, oh, this guy's dragging his wife or his girlfriend into the comic shop and she's going to be bored. And it turns out it's the other way around. A lot of times when, say, a woman comes into the shop, we might mistakenly make the assumption that, oh, she's coming in to buy something for her husband, only to find out she's single and she's the one who loves the stuff. So I've learned to not make any assumptions whatsoever when it comes to the people who walk into the shop, because you never know when you're going to be flat out completely wrong.
So how, not only as a collector and a comic writer, as well as a shop owner, can we kind of fight the stereotypes that have been unfortunately ingrained in society from TV and film of the past?
This was a big thing for us when we took over the shop that we own. The shop that we own, Heidi Ho Comics, has been around since 1977. Partners and I are actually the third owners of the shop, and we took it over about 8-ish years ago. I don't remember exactly. It was pretty much my wife and I who decided, well, we'll be the ones that kind of run the day-to-day of the shop and manage it. We really took on a policy and a mindset when we took it over that we want to make this an inviting place for anybody, any gender, any age, anything. We really adopted the mindset of comics are for everybody. Because before then, when we first took over, we really firmly realized that we were getting the typical comic shop customer and without much diversity there. And whenever a woman would walk in the shop, you could see it in her demeanor, her body language, that she felt completely out of place. And a lot of that changed when we took over because my wife began to work in the shop. We had hired another female employee, and it really changed the dynamic of the shop. Women would come in feeling uncomfortable, and then when they would get a friendly hello from the person behind the counter, who would be my wife or maybe another female staff member, it would suddenly change their demeanor. They would realize that, hey, this isn't just some nerdy guy thing. I can enjoy this stuff too. I mean, I saw the movies and I liked the characters and I want to read stuff, but I want to go somewhere where I feel comfortable and safe. And we really worked to foster that environment. And we did it by really training the staff to be attentive to everybody, no matter who they are, to talk to them in a friendly, polite manner, and really get them excited about reading whatever it is, whether they want to be a reader or a collector, to get them excited about it and let them know that, hey, this is a place where we treat you just like anyone else.
You have Volume 6 as a Kickstarter right now. It looks like it's going to be funded. You have, when does the Kickstarter end, actually?
As of right now, it's going to end in 11 days, and it's sitting at 95% funded. We're getting close to the home stretch, and we're pretty much right about there. So if I just keep pushing, it won't have any problem, I don't think, reaching the funding. This is the 4th Kickstarter that I've done, and I've built enough of a fan base for my comic strip that each one got funded. I had a good percentage of my fan base turn out to go ahead and just get all of them completely funded. So I'm not too concerned about that. I'm really happy with the amount of fans of my work that I have, that they always come through. So I'm looking forward to getting the book to them.
With this 4th Kickstarter, obviously lessons were learned in the first 3. What did you do to make this 4th Kickstarter a little more seamless than either some in the past, or what other lessons did you learn to make your life a little easier?
Well, the big mistake I did with my first one was I set my funding goal without actually researching how much it would cost to do a print run for the number that I wanted. And I ended up reaching my goal and getting the funding, but not having enough money. So I actually had to kick in some of my own money to get the whole print run taken care of. So that problem, for sure, I made sure to never have again. It's still a learning process. Doing 4 Kickstarters is really just enough to really get the ball rolling and learning on what you're doing. I have other indie comic creator friends that have done 10 times the amount of Kickstarters that I've done, and they've really gotten fantastic with it. And I try to learn from them because I've gotten really friendly with a lot of them. So each time I do a Kickstarter, I've picked up a new little tip from them that I try to focus on. I like the new feature that Kickstarter has. You can actually get your Kickstarter up without actually having it go live, and give people the chance to start following it, so that when it does go live, they all get a notification saying it's live now, go ahead and jump in. I did that this time, and the lesson I learned from doing it was do it sooner out. A week is not enough. You should be doing it at least 3 or 4 weeks out, so you have enough time to get those followers really going, and because someone had said, well, you should get at least about 100 followers. And I couldn't quite get there because I was only a week out. So lesson learned for the next time.
I have to ask this question as well, too, just because I'm always curious about the creative process in itself, not only from an artistic standpoint, but from a writing standpoint as well, too. What is your writing kryptonite? Actually, and that's the question, but what is the equivalent of Kryptonite in the Marvel Universe?
You might have me stumped. What is the equivalent of Kryptonite in the Marvel Universe? Oh my goodness. Unless you want to have the rest of this episode just be me staring at the ceiling, maybe we can get back to that.
Fair enough. So then,
and there's somebody watching right now who's like a total walking encyclopedia of comics that's probably yelling the answer at the screen as we're speaking right now.
Okay, well, there's a segue right there. Those that are watching this video, you better comment below on this interview and tell me what is the equivalent of Kryptonite in the Marvel Universe. Doesn't matter which superhero it is. I want to know. I'm curious. So then the question to you that you can actually answer for this, at least for now, is, as a creative person, what is your Kryptonite?
Gosh, time. Because it always seems to get away from me. And I find myself procrastinating more than I should a lot of the times. And it's always the thought of, oh, well, I can start that tomorrow. And then tomorrow comes and you think, well, I can start it tomorrow. Yeah, I think with any creator, their kryptonite is always organization of their creative time. None of us are able to do this like literally as a full-time basis and be their only job. There's only maybe like a tiny few who can. So a lot of us are working other jobs. A lot of us are doing other responsibilities. So carving out a dedicated amount of time every day, every week to do just their creative endeavors is probably honestly the hardest thing. You know, once you get that ball rolling, you can sustain that roll, but getting that ball rolling in that aspect has always been the hardest thing.
Yeah, I'm like that with interviews currently. It's just too much of a backlog and too much procrastination, unfortunately.
Sure. Right. But when you get started, the hardest thing is literally to get that giant boulder moving. But once it's moving, it's like, hey, this isn't so hard.
What was the first time that you learned that language had power?
First time I learned that, I think, was probably many years ago. I was the cartoonist of my college newspaper. This is a junior college here in the LA area, El Camino College. And I did a comic strip that I did not think would be thought of as inflammatory at all. But it riled up a certain community out there that literally went after me, and I realized, oh, what I do and what I actually draw and say in a cartoon can really have an effect that maybe is not very good at all, that can actually spur on some very negative criticism, not just towards the subject in the strip, but also directly at me. And it's funny because I was just randomly thinking about this the other day, where I actually had people come to the office of the school newspaper specifically to talk to me. And I say talk to me is not quite accurate, more like to yell and berate me for what I did. And it was, I think at that point I realized, oh, I think that what you put out there can have an effect that isn't really going to be what you thought it was, and is really going to get people just completely riled up and mad at you.
So then as a writer and a creator of this amazing collection of comics, when was the first time you realized that I could do this as a career?
I think I realized it right off. And I had the delusion that, oh, I'm going to start doing it and all my comic strips are going to go viral and I'm going to be rich and successful within a year. And that was probably 8 years ago. So I'm still waiting. Like most indie creators, they have bigger ambitions than what is realistic for the level of creativity or talent that they have at the time. So I realized early on that it's what I want, but it took several more years to realize that it might be possible. Honestly, I'm still working at it. There is no point anytime soon where I can quit doing my day job. And but it would be nice if I could, and I can just be a full-time cartoonist and do just that. that's kind of a rarefied air situation where people can do that. And I commend the people who can. That's not going to stop me from trying. I'm still going to try, and I'm still going to do my best to get there. And if I only get halfway, then great. If I only have half the fan base that I really want, or half the success that I really want, well, that's a lot more than what I would have if I just gave up altogether at the very beginning.
I'm going to play a quick game of overrated, underrated right now. And I'll name a superhero, and you can tell me if they're overrated or underrated. Start off with the obvious one, Spider-Man.
I'm going to go outside the box and say evenly rated. I can't say he's under or over.
This series has really not gotten a lot of love, at least in the TV and film industry. The Fantastic Four.
Extremely underrated.
How so?
You're talking about basically the founding superhero group that literally kicked off Marvel Comics, basically, at least for the first 100 issues, done by the super team of Jack Kirby and Stan Lee. The rest of the run of the comics has been impossible to surpass. And the amount of great characters that have come out of that comic book, Black Panther, Silver Surfer, so on and so on and so on, basically a wealth of characters for the Marvel Universe. And obviously, any incarnation in animation or film of the Fantastic Four have fallen way, way below. I mean, from the very beginning, when it got an animated series and they replaced the Human Torch with Herbie the Robot, every incarnation in TV and film have been completely underwhelming. So there's a lot more that can be done with it, and it can be done so much better. And it could literally, in my mind, be something in film that could just blow the pants off the Avengers, X-Men, and so on and so on. So extremely underrated.
The X-Men.
My wife is going to kill me for saying this. Overrated. My wife grew up watching the X-Men animated series with her younger brother. He was little. So she kind of really gravitated towards the X-Men. She likes the X-Men. So in the shop, when new X-Men titles comes out, she likes to read them and enjoy them. She's always been an avid reader. I just never got it. I've never really been hugely into the X-Men. I liked it during the era of like the John Byrne, Chris Claremont run back in the 80s. But I just find the continuity so convoluted. Trying to keep track of these millions of characters is just ponderous. And there's very little in the X-Men mythos that I can really gravitate towards and grab onto. And I know there are people who love the X-Men, and God love them as well. But for me, overrated.
And finally, we'll do the Eternals.
Ooh, I'll say underrated only because until there was news about a movie coming out, nobody even knew who the heck they were. Look, I love Jack Kirby. Not all his work is great. And if you really try to read some of those original Eternals books that he did, it's rather hokey and cheesy. So it makes me wonder what they're going to do with the movie, if they're going to base a lot of it on the Kirby stuff or the later stuff, because it would be a better bet to do the later stuff than the original Kirby stuff, outside of the visuals, of course. The visuals of the original series were just amazing.
Yeah.
Just way out there for Kirby even. But yeah, underrated considering, I mean, how many people really, even before this movie, how many people even heard of the Eternals?
Well, probably not many. I mean, it's amazing the history of comics in itself. Yeah, I was looking at that. That's why I asked. That the history of comics itself is truly amazing and incredible. And people like yourself who enjoy showcasing knowledge and sharing knowledge and showing other people that, hey, there's a wide world of comics, not just what you see in film and TV. You have a history of enjoyment and entertainment. And I'm glad that at least not only with the store, but with your own collection of comics yourself, you're showcasing that it's fine to be a geek these days. So I'm glad to see that.
Yeah, it certainly wasn't like that when I was a kid.
No.
I remember hiding out in the school library with my other geek friends trading comics, because if we were open with it anywhere, obviously we'd get beaten up.
Yeah.
But times have changed. The nerds have taken over, or at least they've taken over the film studios for sure.
At what point are we good enough?
Never. Never. If you're not striving to better yourself, even in old age, I think that you're doing life wrong. I don't think you're ever good enough. It's the same with art for most artists. They have a vision in their head of what they want the piece they're trying to do look like. And no matter how hard they try, they will never get it exactly like that. It will never be good enough. And that's one of the reasons why when you see artists being very hard on their work, that's why, because they had this grand vision in their head, and what they see on the paper doesn't quite match up, even though anyone else would look at it and go, oh my God, that is stunning. But for the artist, it's not what they envisioned in their head. So, and I think that is how it is with life. You have your life envisioned in your head and you're striving towards that, but it's almost like you can never quite reach it. But you keep going to try to do it, because every time you do something to get to that goal, you keep bettering yourself. But you never quite get there. And then you die.
Then I was going to ask, what is one thing you'd like to do before you die?
No, completely unrelated to comics. I really do wish to travel more. There's so many parts of the world that I would love to see. Beyond that, I would love to see Collectors be an animated TV series, so I can take that money and then go travel.
Don't see why not. I mean, they've done Lower Decks. They've done,
I tell you, I don't know how many times I've had people buy my books and say, oh my God, I love your comic strip so much. It should totally be an animated series. It has to be. I totally see this as an animated series. And I want to tell them, okay, great. Go get a job at a TV studio, be a producer, and then come back and talk to me, and then we'll work that out. But, until then, I don't quite have an in to do that at the moment. But I would love to see it, come to that.
What is the wisest piece of advice that someone ever gave to you that stuck with you in your lifetime?
That skill is always better than talent. And the explanation of that is, if you rely on just your talent to get by, like say if you're pursuing writing and drawing comics, if you're not constantly working on improving your skill of writing and drawing and just relying on the talent that you were born with, even if it's quite a bit, that you're only going to go so far and then you're going to stop. As opposed to if you constantly work on your skill every day or every week or whatever time you can afford to it, you're going to go way farther than you could ever have gone on just talent alone. Talent is finite. Skill is not. So work on your skill. Don't rely on your talent.
At what point did your life change for the better?
Married my wife.
That's an easy answer.
Very easy answer. She is my best friend. She is, in my opinion, the most beautiful and sexiest woman in the world. She is my muse for my comic strip. She is sometimes my biggest aggravation, but is it aggravations that I love to death and would rather have in my life than not have her in it.
Before I go into my last 4 questions, is there anything that I haven't touched upon other than the social media and all that other stuff that you'd like to showcase that those that are watching and listening to this interview?
If you are a collector of comic books or you love the whole pop culture phenomenon of comic books and you like to laugh, then I think my Comic Strip Collectors is definitely something you should check out. It's done as a weekly webcomic that you can follow online on my website or on the socials. If you go to the website collectorscomic.com, there's links to the socials there that you can follow. Also links to the current Kickstarter, which if you want to just make it real easy, you can go to collectorsonkickstarter.com. It'll take you right to the Kickstarter. So check out the cool rewards. I mean, it's for volume 6, the printed volume number 6 of the series. But if you haven't got any of the other ones, you can get those in the rewards as well and get caught up. And the only catch with that is that volume 3, for some reason, completely sold out. Not 1, but 3, which I have no explanation for.
Say, what geek pop culture did you do in volume 3?
I honestly, I don't know. I didn't do anything overly different in the 3rd one that I didn't do in the others. Maybe just my push to promote it when it came out was good enough that it eventually sold out. I have no explanation for it. Who created the pyramids? We'll never know. Why did the issue 3 sell out? We'll never know. I don't know.
Everyone has one or two people that inspired them on their path to where they are today. Who was that for you?
I think, honestly, I have 2. Obviously, my wife, because she's the one who really pushed me to really pursue a creative career. So that's a given. But the other answer is my dad. My parents are Italian immigrants. They came here as adults. I was born here. So they didn't really have much of a knowledge about comic books or the comic book world or, buying or collecting comics. My dad just saw that I liked them, would bring them home for me. And when he saw me at a young age starting to draw and copy the superheroes from the comic onto paper, he would then, God rest his soul, he passed away 3 years ago, but he would then steal supplies from work, big white boards and pencils and everything to bring home to constantly keep me supplied with art supplies and drawing material. And he didn't quite really fully understand, my want or need to be an artist. But he was like, hey, if the kid likes it, then let's go with it. Let's get him what he needs. So I think inadvertently, he really kind of helped get that ball rolling.
From a professional standpoint, you are the owner of a wonderful store in California. You are a collector of comics. You have now basically funded your 4th Kickstarter campaign, and I'm sure you're going to have many more in the future. And you continue to produce an amazing comic with, of course, Collector's Comic. From a professional standpoint, you are successful. But from a personal perspective, do you consider yourself successful?
Only in the sense that I have a roof over my head, there's food in the fridge, and the bills are paid. But really, I see a lot of my other indie creator friends, and they are the people that I aspire to. And I see where they are, and I say that they're successful, and I haven't quite gotten there yet. And I've talked to a lot of them, and they kind of tell me differently. Like they don't feel successful. So I don't know if we ever fully feel successful, because there's always going to be somebody above you that is doing something different from you that you think, why am I not doing that? It's working for them. How come I'm not doing something similar to that? If I did that, I would be successful. You can win awards or have success with a particular book or something that you put out. But then a month or two later, you're right back to where you were, which is sit down, do the work, and keep at it. I don't know if anyone ever really feels successful, because no matter who you are, what level you're at, you're always looking at the people above you and wanting to be there.
That can lead down to a destructive path, though, as well, too. Comparing yourself to other people isn't always healthy.
No, it is not. It is not. I don't do that artistically or creatively. I figure what I do is my own thing, and no one else is going to do it the way I do it. Therefore, it is solely my own style, my own thing, my own project. I'm not going to look at my comic strips and compare it to someone else and say, God, I wish my comic strips were as good as theirs. I completely avoid that. I try to live in a bubble when it comes to that. But I do look at some other indie creators, and I look at the methods of what they're doing to promote their stuff, or where they're showcasing their stuff, or how they do conventions, or which conventions they do. And I try to learn from that. Why aren't I doing that? And the next question is, okay, should I do that? If I do that, what's going to happen? And if it's a good enough idea, let's find out. I'm going to try that. So I think from outside of creative spectrum, that's where I'm looking at the people above me and trying to learn from.
The reverse of success is failure. How do you deal with your failures?
I wish I had some wise answer of, I learned from them, I study what went wrong, and I try to move on. And to a certain extent, that is true. But I just don't let it get to me. I think I try something and it doesn't work, and I say, okay, well, that didn't work. Let's try this instead. And if that doesn't work, okay, well, that didn't work. Let's try this instead. And then eventually something works. Comics are a very odd career choice, I think, because If you line up about a half a dozen comic book creators and ask them, how do they break in the business? How do they get successful? Every single one will have a different answer because there is no clear-cut path. The door will open up for this creator, but as soon as they walk in, it closes back up and another creator's got to crawl in through a window over here to get successful. So there's just, you got to roll with it when it comes to failure in this business because there is no clear path. You just have to keep trying different paths until one is accessible and allows you to keep going. Putting too much stock in your failures as far as trying to learn from it or getting overly depressed from it is just not the way to go, because you just got to shrug it off and say, okay, well, let's try the next thing.
Or else I don't think I'd keep doing this for 13 years.
Same with me. I mean, with everything that's gone on in the last years of me doing the last 8 years of me doing my comic strip, I think that any other person would just give up and say, it just doesn't work. And I think that you just keep going because you just love doing it. There's no other greater love than creating something, putting it out there and getting a reaction from people from it. And that really is enough to make you want to keep doing it, even though you keep literally pounding your head on the same wall over and over because you can't get through it sometimes.
The younger generation is looking at your work and they're becoming inspired to be creative in their own way, whether it's as a writer or as a comic creator, or maybe eventually as a business owner, or could be just as a collector. Whatever they'd like to do creatively, I'm sure they can accomplish. How can they inspire the generation that follows them?
Doing your best work is always the best inspiration for the generation after you. If you are doing work that is kind of half-assed, I don't know if I can say that, and just not sincere, that's honestly, it's not going to inspire anybody. If you're putting your best foot forward and putting your best work out there, no matter if it's comics, film, or whatever, it's always going to resonate with somebody. It's always going to come across as, hey, that's just like me to somebody. And that's going to inspire them to want to do it themselves. I don't really know of any other way to inspire someone other than just do the best possible work that you can.
Well, Eddie, I do hate to say it, but that ends this particular episode of Two Geeks Talking. You survived, so congratulations. I want to have you back on. I want to talk with you in the future about not only, comics, we'll dive a little more in depth, and maybe we'll get the answer to the Marvel equivalent of Kryptonite sooner than later, I hope.
It's going to hit me at about 3 a.m. when I'm, just jumping out of bed. And I'll be sure to call you or text you or something at 3 a.m. to let you know.
But before I let you go, where can we find you and how can we support you on the internet and through social media?
You can always find me at my website, collectorscomic.com, and that is the main website for my comic series, my comic strip series, Collectors. On there, you will find links for my socials. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And currently, right now, the Kickstarter for Volume 6 of my printed Collectors Annuals is up right now, and you can get to it easily by going to collectors on Kickstarter.com.
Well, like I said, that ends this particular episode of Two Geeks Talking. I want to thank you, Eddie, for coming on the show again. It was a fun time.
Thank you. This was a lot of fun. Would love to be back anytime.
As I said, that ends this particular episode. You can, of course, find this interview and over 1,000 others on our website, tgtmedia.com or twogeekstalking.com. That's the word two, not the number two. And, of course, on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/c/TGT Media. And as I say every week, everyone has a story to tell. It's up to me to help bring that out. Thanks for listening and watching on Two Geeks Talking. Hey, all, Kurt Sasso here from Two Geeks Talking. If you like this video and these quick clips here, make sure you take a look at our YouTube channel, youtube.com/TGT Media. Make sure you hit the like button and subscribe as well. Hit the bell to make sure you get notifications, of course, from videos like this here. Thank you, everyone, for listening and watching over the years, and keep listening and watching for new and exciting interviews with talented and creative people in the entertainment industry. I'm your host, Kurt Sasso. Thank you so much.